Have you ever wondered what secrets might be revealed if you could look directly into the face of the dead? Number 10. Could a face from the past haunt us forever? The haunting visage of Napoleon Bonaparte stares back at us through time, his death mask a final testament to the man who once conquered Europe. After his death on May 5, 1821, on the remote island of St. Helena, Napoleon's personal physician, Francesco Antimarchi, made a plaster cast of the former emperor's face. What makes this death mask particularly fascinating is the controversy surrounding it. Multiple versions exist, with debates raging over which is authentic. Some versions show a serene, almost peaceful Napoleon, while others depict a man who appears to have suffered greatly, fueling conspiracy theories about possible arsenic poisoning. The mask captures the fallen emperor's distinctive features: the broad forehead, the famous Roman nose, and the strong jawline that adorned countless coins, paintings, and statues during his reign. Napoleon's death mask became a prized possession among his admirers and enemies alike, with copies distributed throughout Europe. These masks served not only as mementos of the controversial figure, but also as politically charged artifacts. For Bonaparte's supporters, the mask was a relic of their fallen hero. For his enemies, it was proof that even the mightiest could fall. Today, these masks reside in museums across the world, from Paris to New Orleans, each claiming authenticity, each telling its own version of history's story. Number 9. What does the face of a genius reveal in death? When Ludwig van Beethoven drew his final breath on March 26, 1827, in Vienna, the world lost one of its greatest musical geniuses. Hours after his passing, sculptor Joseph Danhauser arrived to create a plaster cast of the composer's face. Beethoven's death mask reveals a man who appears to have been through tremendous suffering, his cheeks sunken, his mouth slightly agape, his features sharp and defined by years of illness and progressive deafness. The mask presents a stark contrast to the more idealized portraits painted during his lifetime. What's particularly moving about Beethoven's death mask is how it captures the intensity that characterized his music and personality. Even in death, there's something fierce and determined in those features. His furrowed brow, which carried the weight of creating symphonies he could never hear, tells the story of a man who battled against incredible odds. The mask became an important reference for artists who created posthumous portraits and sculptures of the composer. It also became an object of fascination for phrenologists of the 19th century, who studied the shape of Beethoven's skull to try to understand the physical source of his genius. Today, the original mask is housed in the Beethoven House in Bonn, Germany, where visitors can come face to face with the raw, unfiltered visage of the man who gave us the Moonlight Sonata and the Ode to Joy. The mask reminds us that behind every immortal work of art was a very mortal human being. Number 8. How does a revolutionary look in eternal sleep? Maximilien Robespierre, the controversial figurehead of the French Revolution's reign of terror, met his own terrifying end on July 28, 1794. The day before his execution by guillotine, Robespierre had attempted suicide by shooting himself in the jaw, but succeeded only in gravely wounding himself. His death mask, created shortly after his beheading, shows this damage, a distorted jaw and features contorted by both his failed suicide attempt and the violence of his execution. This mask serves as a grisly reminder of revolution's capacity to consume its own children. What makes Robespierre's death mask particularly haunting is knowing the circumstances of his final hours. The man who had sent thousands to the guillotine ultimately faced the same blade, broken and suffering. His mask doesn't show the refined, principled lawyer who initially championed democracy, but rather a man destroyed by the very machine of terror he helped create. The death mask became a powerful political symbol in the aftermath of the revolution. For some, it represented justice served against a bloodthirsty tyrant. For others, it was a martyr's face, someone who had tried to create a new world but had been destroyed by counter-revolutionary forces. Historians and medical experts have studied the mask extensively, debating whether the damage visible was from the suicide attempt, rough handling after death, or perhaps even torture before execution. The mask, now housed in the Granite Museum in Aix-en-Provence, France, serves as a stark reminder of how quickly power can shift during revolutionary times. The face that once struck fear into the hearts of French aristocrats now provokes only pity and historical contemplation. Number 7. Can death preserve beauty forever? When unknown 16-year-old girl drowned in the Seine River in Paris in the late 1880s, no one could have predicted that her face would become one of the most reproduced in history. L'Inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine, has a death mask that has captivated people for over a century with its serene, almost Mona Lisa-like smile. Legend has it that a pathologist at the Paris morgue was so struck by the young woman's beauty that he made a plaster cast of her face, an unusual action for an unidentified drowning victim. The resulting mask shows a young woman with closed eyes, smooth features, and that enigmatic slight smile that has led many to wonder, how could someone who died by drowning look so peaceful? The mask became wildly popular in bohemian circles of the early 20th century. Copies hung in artists' studios throughout Europe, inspiring poetry, novels, and artwork. Albert Camus compared her smile to the Mona Lisa's. Anais Nin wrote about being disturbed by copies of the mask she saw in Paris shops. Vladimir Nabokov references her in his work. But perhaps most strangely, this anonymous drowning victim's face achieved its greatest fame in the 1960s when her features were used as the model for Resusci Anne, the CPR training mannequin. This means that millions of people around the world have literally pressed their lips against a reproduction of this unknown woman's face, making it, as some have called it, the most kissed face in history. The original mask is believed to be in Paris, though numerous authentic copies exist. The true identity of the girl remains unknown, but her peaceful countenance continues to spark debate about whether the mask actually came from a living model rather than a drowning victim, as the serenity of the expression seems inconsistent with a death by water. Number 6. What happens when death immortalizes evil? The cold, calculating eyes of Joseph Stalin peer out from his death mask, created after the Soviet dictator's death from a cerebral hemorrhage on March 5, 1953. The mask captures the Georgian revolutionary turned iron-fisted ruler exactly as millions had feared him. Stern, uncompromising, with his characteristic mustache and the pockmarked skin he so often had airbrushed out of official photographs. Stalin's death mask is particularly significant because it represents one of the few authentic representations of his actual appearance. Throughout his rule, Stalin carefully controlled his image, having photographs heavily retouched to remove his facial scars and make him appear more dignified and statesmanlike. The death mask, however, hides nothing. It shows the real face of a man responsible for the deaths of millions through purges, gulags, and forced collectivization. The creation of Stalin's death mask followed a long-standing Russian tradition of preserving the faces of great leaders and artists. However, unlike many death masks made to honor and remember beloved figures, Stalin's mask exists in a complex political context. After Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech in 1956, which denounced Stalin's cult of personality and brutal excesses, the mask became less a venerated object and more a historical artifact of a dark period. Yet for some who still admire Stalin, particularly in parts of the former Soviet Union, the mask remains a relic of a leader they consider great. Today, Stalin's death mask resides in various museums across Russia and Georgia. Viewing it provides a chilling experience, coming face to face with a man whose policies and paranoia led to suffering on an industrial scale. The mask reminds us that history's monsters were not mythical creatures but flesh and blood humans whose ordinary faces concealed extraordinary capacity for cruelty. Number 5. Can a face tell us how a king really lived? King Tutankhamun's golden funeral mask isn't technically a death mask in the traditional plaster cast sense, but it serves the same memorial purpose and is undoubtedly the most famous and spectacular death mask in human history. When British archaeologist Howard Carter broke into Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he uncovered this breathtaking gold mask that had covered the head and shoulders of the mummified young pharaoh for over 3,000 years. Made of solid gold inlaid with semi-precious stones and glass paste, the mask weighs 22.5 pounds and depicts the boy king with the traditional pharaonic beard, striped headpiece, and the protective symbols of the cobra and vulture on his forehead. What makes Tutankhamun's mask so fascinating is that it's simultaneously a portrait and an idealization. Experts believe it bears some resemblance to the actual king who died around age 19, but it also transforms him into Osiris, the god of the afterlife. The mask was designed not just to commemorate how Tutankhamun looked in life, but to assist in his journey to the afterlife by giving him the appearance of a god. The discovery of this mask changed our understanding of ancient Egyptian art and funerary practices, while also sparking Tut mania across the Western world. The mask has traveled the globe in various museum exhibitions, becoming perhaps the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt and archaeology itself. It has survived a beard-breaking incident during a hasty repair job at the Cairo Museum in 2014, which required international restoration experts to fix. Today, Tutankhamun's mask resides in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where it continues to draw visitors from around the world who stand in awe before this glimpse into ancient Egyptian conceptions of death, divinity, and the afterlife. The mask reminds us that humans have always sought ways to defy death, if not in body, then through creating enduring, beautiful memorials. Number 4, is it possible to see a poet's soul in wax? John Keats, the Romantic poet whose life was cut tragically short by tuberculosis at just 25 years old, left behind not only immortal poems like Ode to a Nightingale, but also a death mask that seems to embody the romantic ideal of the beautiful, suffering artist. Keats died in Rome on February 23 in 18A, where he had gone hoping the Mediterranean climate might cure his illness. His death mask shows a young man of striking beauty, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and delicate features that appear almost at peace, despite the suffering of his final days. What makes Keats's death mask particularly poignant is how it contrasts with accounts of his agonizing end. His friend Joseph Severn, who nursed him in his final days, described how Keats coughed blood, struggled for breath, and starved himself to hasten death's release. Yet the mask shows none of this torment. Instead, it preserves the poet in a state of serene beauty that aligns perfectly with the romantic movement's fascination with the beautiful death of the artist. The death mask became an important reference for posthumous portraits of Keats, as few reliable images of him existed from his lifetime. For his admirers in the 19th century, the mask became a kind of relic, allowing them to gaze upon the face of a poet who had written lines that seemed to foreshadow his own early death. When I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. Today, Keats's death mask can be viewed at his former home in Hampstead, London, now the Keats House Museum. Visitors often report feeling an uncanny connection to the poet when viewing the mask, as though the plaster somehow bridges the 2 centuries since his death. The mask serves not just as a record of Keats's physical appearance, but as a tangible connection to a poetic genius who, despite his short life, created works of enduring beauty. Number 3, how does history change when we see its heroes face to face? Abraham Lincoln's death mask, created in the hours after his assassination on April 14, 1865, captures the 16th American president in his final repose. The mask shows Lincoln's distinctive features: the prominent cheekbones, the deep-set eyes, the famous beard, and the long, angular face that had become increasingly gaunt during the stressful years of the Civil War. Unlike some death masks that seem peaceful, Lincoln's mask reflects the physical toll that the presidency had taken on him. The deep lines etched into his face tell the story of a man who had borne the weight of a nation divided against itself. What makes Lincoln's death mask particularly significant is how it contrasts with the few photographs we have of him. In the age before video or widespread photography, this three-dimensional representation gives us our most intimate look at the man who held the Union together and emancipated America's slaves. The mask reveals aspects of Lincoln's appearance that photographs couldn't capture as effectively, the asymmetry of his face that some medical historians attribute to a genetic condition called Marfan syndrome. Lincoln actually had two masks made during his lifetime, a life mask in 1860 before he became president, and another in 1865, just 2 months before his assassination. Comparing these with his death mask provides a remarkable visual record of how 5 years as a wartime president aged him. Sculptor Clark Mills created the death mask, though he did not include the bullet wound that killed the president. Today, copies of Lincoln's death mask can be found in various museums, including the National Portrait Gallery and the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. These masks allow visitors to come face to face with one of America's most revered presidents in a way that feels startlingly intimate and human. The mask reminds us that behind the monumental historical achievements was a flesh and blood man who carried immense burdens and ultimately gave his life for his country. Number 2, can a mask reveal what history has tried to hide? Mary Queen of Scots, the Catholic queen who was beheaded in 1587 after being found guilty of plotting against her Protestant cousin Queen Elizabeth I, left behind a death mask that challenges our understanding of this romantic historical figure. While not confirmed as authentic by all historians, the purported death mask of Mary shows a face very different from the idealized portraits painted during her lifetime. The mask reveals a woman with a prominently hooked nose, strong features, and the high forehead considered beautiful in her era. If authentic, this mask raises fascinating questions about historical beauty standards and how rulers controlled their images. What makes Mary's supposed death mask particularly interesting is how it conflicts with the romanticized image of the queen that has persisted for centuries. In paintings, Mary appears with delicate features and the fair beauty celebrated in her time. The mask, however, suggests a more formidable appearance. This discrepancy highlights how royal portraiture functioned as propaganda, often idealizing monarchs to enhance their image of power and divine right to rule. The creation of Mary's death mask would have been complicated by the circumstances of her death. After 3 strikes of the axe, the executioner held up her head to the crowd, only to find himself holding a wig as her actual head fell to the floor, revealing short gray hair. This gruesome detail makes the existence of an accurate death mask somewhat questionable, though supporters of its authenticity suggest it could have been made after her head was reattached to her body for burial. The mask, housed in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, continues to fascinate visitors and historians alike. Whether authentic or not, it serves as a tangible connection to one of history's most dramatic royal executions and raises important questions about physical appearance, royal image-making, and how we visualize historical figures. If genuine, Mary's death mask offers us a rare opportunity to see past the carefully controlled imagery of royalty to the actual human being beneath the crown. Number 1, would you recognize death if it wore your own face? Oliver Cromwell, the controversial Lord Protector who overthrew the English monarchy in the 17th century, has one of history's most disturbing death mask stories. Cromwell died of natural causes in 1658, but 3 years later, after the restoration of the monarchy, his body was exhumed, hung in chains, and beheaded as posthumous punishment for signing King Charles I's death warrant. Cromwell's death mask, likely created when he initially died, shows his warty, distinctive features, the strong nose, the firm mouth, and the determined expression of the man who turned England into a republic and ruled as its Lord Protector. What makes Cromwell's death mask remarkable is how it aligns with his own instructions for portraiture during his lifetime. When having his portrait painted, Cromwell famously instructed the artist to paint him warts and all, rejecting the flattery common in royal portraits. His death mask, with its uncompromising realism, seems to honor this commitment to truth over vanity. The fate of Cromwell's actual head after the posthumous execution adds a macabre element to the story of his death mask. The severed head was displayed on a pike at Westminster Hall for more than 20 years before falling down during a storm. It then passed through the hands of various collectors and museums until allegedly being buried at Sydney Sussex College, Cambridge, in 1960. The death mask thus takes on added significance as perhaps the best record of Cromwell's complete appearance. Today, Cromwell's death mask can be seen at the British Museum and Warwick Castle, among other locations. The mask continues to provoke strong reactions, just as the man himself does in British historical memory, revered by some as a champion of parliamentary democracy and reviled by others as a regicidal dictator. The mask captures not just his physical features but also something of the stern Puritan character of a man who changed the course of English history through sheer force of will. Looking into that face, visitors can connect directly with one of history's most divisive figures.